Welcome, viewers. We have a discussions today with Stuart McGill. As we know, COVID-19 impacts on the whole world, and we are fighting unitedly against the COVID-19. So all world peoples are united right now. Stuart McGill is from Britain. He's from live from the and he's a martial art instructor as well as activist of Communist Party of Britain. So welcome, Stuart McGill, in our news portal.
Thank you very much indeed for having me, Shankar.
Welcome, sir. Today we have the discussions. The subject is COVID-19 and impacts on the Britain working class. So first of all, I need to know what is the positions, what is the situations right now in Britain.
Well, right now we're slowly emerging from a lockdown. We're getting various instructions from the government, some of which are more clear than others. But if you went out 2 months ago, you know there was something different in London because there were very few people on the streets. Central London, there was no one there. If you go out now,
Closer to camera.
yeah, no
Come
problem.
closer to camera. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
sorry.
okay, fine.
But
Fine.
right now, you go out and it's like normal. Very few people are wearing masks. We still haven't got clear instructions about that. They're probably going to tell us to wear masks sometime soon. But a couple of months ago, they said the masks don't matter. So because of lack of clarity and this and other issues, people aren't really sure what's going on. We had an awful lot of people die during March and April. The deaths are now down. The excess deaths from COVID are down to about 150 a day, which I guess is good compared to what 800 or 900 we were getting in April and May. Still way too much. And also we're concerned about a second wave. I personally think we haven't even got over the first wave, but we're going to go back to normal. People are back in construction sites. People are back doing security jobs. The schools are pretty much back. And I think we're back in gyms at the end of July. So, yeah, there is a great deal of concern among some of us about what's going to happen there.
So, what about the death ratio is now emerging? Earlier, we can find it out that Britain is placed in number 2, but right now they are improving. Is that right?
I don't know if it's improving so much. I mean, it's certainly been a bit lower than it was in March and April lately, but it's been, I think, a regular 140, 150 deaths every day for the last week or so. Yeah, things have got better, but in terms of our per capita performance, it's hideous. I think only Belgium is worse than we are. And also, everyone reports things a little bit differently. They're reporting about 45,000 deaths at the moment, but the real figure is probably more like 65, 66,000. The government's been a bit clever about the way they're reporting things, but certainly most people acknowledge about 65, 66,000 deaths. At some point per capita, Brazil might take us over, as indeed might the USA. It's interesting that countries with the really bad records tend to be run by right-wing idiots.
So, during the lockdown period, many people losing their jobs. What about the working class positions right now in the Britain?
I think there are two main elements of the position. One is the working class have suffered disproportionately. I was reading this morning that people in poor areas have died at twice the rate of people in more wealthy areas. And this reflects the inequality we have in the country. So there is that element there. They've suffered disproportionately, and also they're concerned about having to go back to work now because there is a great deal of pressure to go back to work in certain occupations, like, say, construction. I was walking through Woolwich and Greenwich, just little parts southeast London here. You see loads of guys on site. They're not able to observe social distancing there. When they go into their changing facility, they can't observe social distancing then. When they go to work on the underground, in particular in London, this is a problem. Very few people are able to work in London, and very few people can drive to work because there's nowhere to drive. So you're forced to take the underground, and that is packed. So these guys can't possibly observe social distancing. And I think apart from security workers, construction workers have had the highest number of deaths per capita of any occupation. And also, it's who is going to pay for this whenever the bills come to be paid, because whenever we had the big financial disaster in 2008, They spent something like 1,300 billion on bailing out the financial sector, which is way more than they've spent so far on bailing people out of this crisis, by the way. And the bankers didn't pay for that. It was the rest of us with austerity and high taxes on spending in particular. So that's a big concern as well. Working class people die more, and in the end, working class people are going to have to pay for some of the measures that they put back in place.
What kind of austerity measures taken by the government for the working class peoples? Because those who are losing their job, how they get the government subsidy or any compensation?
No, at the moment, if you lose your job, you lose your job. So you have to try and find work somewhere else. But there are various furlough schemes in play for those who've been laid off for a short amount of time. For me, as a self-employed person, there is some quite good compensation, which will last for a while. You get taxed on it, but yeah, you do get some compensation. So they have done a semi-decent job in helping people out there. But in the longer term, I'm more concerned about what happens with the almost inevitable depression stroke major recession which follows this. And also we're very concerned about evictions from homes, because a lot of people are having problems in paying the rent.
Very good. And what about in a national health service? Because and once upon a time, the government will decide to privatize the NHS, but people protest around the Britain. What is the situations right now about the NHS services on the people?
First of all, let's make it clear that many of us have been saying for decades that the NHS is underfunded and the NHS is not in a good position to face a major disaster like this. Because for some time now, there has been an expectation of something big happening through a superbug or through something like a COVID, which I guess you can look at as a serious dose of the flu. And there was an exercise a couple of years ago, Exercise Cygnus, I think, in 2016, which said that the NHS is not prepared for this. The government ignored it. There's currently apparently 40,000 vacancies for nurses in the NHS. So they were not in great shape to go ahead and take this. People in the NHS stood up and worked incredibly hard and with great bravery and dedication to get over the problem. So right now there is a great feeling of love for the NHS in the population. Even right-wing politicians are queuing up to say how great the NHS is. So while this lasts, I think they will certainly not want to privatise the NHS or make any real inroads into it. But things pass. We have to keep reminding people what the NHS did, despite how the government basically attacked them for the last 10, 15 years. And stand up for the NHS and for the NHS as a public body rather than something which is slowly privatised, because that process was taking place, well, under Labour governments as well as Tory governments over the last 20 odd years.
So right now, how they will manage to COVID-19 infections, NHS, because many doctors also infected, many doctors lose their life to fight against the COVID-19. So what is your view? Is there any loopholes in safety measurements or any other things happen?
Any what, sorry, sir?
Safety measurements on the health workers. Due to COVID-19, many doctors also losing their lives.
Mm-hmm.
What is the reason behind?
Sorry, I think that in the early days of this crisis, there was very little personal protective stuff. There was very little good PPE, as we call it here. I think that has been largely rectified now. I'm sure it's still not enough, and it is still an issue, but I think things have improved there. And you don't hear as much as you used to about doctors and nurses complaining about the lack of PPE. I think everyone's learned in the process how to handle this. Infections are still high, but they're going down, so you haven't got the same pressure on NHS lives as we did in the dark days of March and April and into May.
So, in terms of Communist Party movement in around the Britain, how will get the support base? What kind of movements you are running right now in Britain? What is your issues right now in the Britain about the working class?
There are many which are brought out by this. One thing we're trying to say is that the extremely poor response of the UK is a function of the austerity we've suffered over the last 20, 30 years and of putting people before profit. Simple as that. So we're trying to emphasize that we got here. This was not some inevitability that fell on us from the heavens. Other countries performed better than we did because they had a better infrastructure in place. They were better prepared for it. We didn't have that. So we're making that point very clear. We're also making a point very clear that the working class have suffered much more badly than people from better off areas. It's a function of the hideous inequality we have in this society. If you're a woman, let me just check the figures here. Yeah, women in working class areas will live till 79. If you're a woman in a wealthy area, you'll live till you're 87. Working class areas, men, they die at 74. And wealthier guys will live till they're 84. So you've got a 10-year difference in life expectancy there between working class men and middle class men. So it's no wonder the working class are suffering more, because the life that's inflicted on them, including the stress that we have inflicted on us these days through flexible labour policies. Very few people are left with a good, solid job which they can rely upon anymore. Many people rely upon the government to pay the housing agencies. So we're trying to emphasise everything about this is is a derivative of the way this capitalism works. In practical terms, one thing I'm looking at for the near future is the massive wave of evictions of people from their homes, which is on the way. And we're trying to find a way of actually advising people about their rights and fighting the evictions. And not just the evictions, but the result of the almost inevitable recession which we have at the moment. Now, there's good, solid work which the party needs to get worked on. Interesting that trade unionization has increased considerably. There's about 100,000 more trade union members, I think, now than there were at the start of the COVID disaster. Something like that anyway. There's been a significant increase in people joining trade unions. So people are aware they need some help in fighting the regime on this one.
Right. I come to the politics of Britain. There's a Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has been left the contender in the election process. But as we all know, the Jeremy Corbyn policies are leaning with left ideology. What is the reason behind it that Jeremy Corbyn has left the politics?
Jeremy Corbyn was a social democrat. He had a party policy which was, reasonably left-wing, given the Labour Party's recent history of completely and utterly buying into capitalist neoliberalism. And there were many things on there which I agreed with. I was a former Labour Party member. The problem that Corbyn had was the way he was presented in the media across here, including some elements of the media which call themselves left-wing, like The Guardian. And also the anti-Semitic allegations against him were just nonsense. Corbyn is the most anti-racist politician we've had over the last 40 years here. But he certainly managed to antagonize the Zionist lobby, and that's one of the reasons why he got grief. But also, I always said this, there are many people in the Labour Party when Corbyn was in charge who would be more happy with a Conservative Party victory than Labour winning under Corbyn. And some of the revelations we've had lately about how Labour Party HQ specifically worked against Corbyn evince that. He had to fight members of his own party, including his party central office, as well as all the other factors working against him. I think the European Union was a problem for him as well, because Labour is split. Many people on the left are split about the European Union. Instinctively, Corbyn didn't like the EU. And so people felt he was EU, and so he alienated some pro-EU people. But party policy was to stay in the EU, so we managed to go ahead and alienate some anti-EU people as well. So Corbyn didn't really have much of a chance, to be honest. Many things conspired against him. Now we have Keir Starmer in charge, who is a reasonable performer. He's not my idea of what a socialist should be. He's been a little bit too easy on the government, and he's not been anywhere near tough enough on those people in the Labour Party who worked against Corbyn.
Actually, during the lockdown period, many Labour workforce getting the salary from those who are in public sector units. But those who are in private sector, is they getting drawing the salary, or what kind of things happen to adjust their daily life expenses?
Some people find it very tough to get by. Some people are doing okay with the furlough, and someone like myself, I've managed to go ahead and transfer my work online. So I've been personally okay with it, but many people are struggling quite badly. They do pay you a furlough salary, but it only goes so far. And so many people are having a real problem right now. That's why I'm concerned about coming evictions when they have a hard job and paying the rent.
Okay, fine. As we all know, the immigrant labor workforce are in Britain at very large.
Mm-hmm.
What about their situations to meet up the expenses during the lockdown? What is their situations right now?
It's been interesting. Leicester is a very, very immigrant town. A lot of Indian people come from Leicester, including my wife's family. They originally moved to Leicester when they came here. And we've had another lockdown in Leicester because they were forced by some very, very bad employers there to work all the way through the lockdown. And they worked in conditions of no social distancing and a lot of congestion inside the factories. And that caused quite a big upsurge in infections in Leicester. And we now have a lockdown there as well. Certainly, BAME people in general have suffered disproportionately with infection. And that's one of the things that people have been quite concerned about. There's even been some talk about, is it a genetic thing that means black and brown people get the infection rather than white people? I'm pretty sure it's not. It's just the fact that they tend to be poorer and they have more stress in their lifestyle, etc. And they live in areas, quite congested areas. So there's all these factors mean that BAME people suffer quite badly. And again, because they tend to get paid a lot less than white people on average, they will have a disproportionate, the virus will have a disproportionate impact on their ability to pay the bills. So, like I say,
But study has suggested those who are in live under the poverty, they will very much vulnerable situation to get the COVID infection. Is that right or something else?
oh yeah, I think anybody who is poor, generally speaking, has the health is worse. That's why the life expectancy figures I spoke about earlier are such. So they tend to be less healthy, and also they've tended to be the people that have had to go back to work earlier or been forced back to work earlier by employers. And that's the reason why they become more ill. So there's all sorts of factors there, including the general state of health.
Okay. What is the what is the age of the retirement in public sector units in Britain?
I think it's something like God. It used to be 65. I think it's 66 now. Yeah, so it's gone up recently. There was talk about making it 70.
If you see in percentage ratio with the private sector employees and public sector employees, how much percentage are in public sector units?
That's an interesting question. I think something like, I'm not sure, I can check up for you, but I think maybe about 30 to 35% of people here work in the public sector now.
But in many country, we have seen in new liberal economics, there's a public sector units has been privatized or sell off. What is the situation in Britain? Is the same thing happened there?
Oh, hell yeah. Whenever I was a kid, we had a nationalized steel industry, we had nationalized water, railway, public services, and telecoms. And since Thatcher came in the 80s, there's been a hell of a lot more privatization. One of the seriously bad privatizations, well, they've all been bad as far as I'm concerned, but one that's had a major impact has been privatization in housing. In 1980, which is not that long ago, 42% of people lived in council, public homes. Now it's only something like 6 or 7%. And so as the housing has been privatized, we developed, even in a city like London, where we have more homes than people, we've developed a housing crisis on the back of that. And that's one of the big things which, again, does concern me in this country going ahead, because a hell of a lot of people buy homes in London to invest in. And so people will build a home not for someone to live in, but as someone to invest. A lot of Chinese and Russian people invest in there. And because there's so much money laundering goes through the city of London, a lot of that laundered money finds its way into the London property market. So, privatization is and has been a major issue, in particular the way it's impacted the housing market here.
What is the situation? If you see in 3 years, 4 years down the line, with the Tory and Labour government comparison, which government is much more friendlier with the working class?
Oh, I think you have to say Labour, but with many reservations about how friendly they are towards the working class. Because, like I say, once you had someone like Corbyn came in, who was going to initiate policies in favour of the working class and to restore not just the imbalance of income between wealthy people and poor people, but the imbalance of power between the wealthy and the poor, then a large part of the Labour Party revolted against that. I mean, I got to say, I was in the Labour Party for a good few years, sometimes active, sometimes not. And I always thought half of these people should be in the Conservative Party and half of them should be in the Communist Party. Obviously, I chose to actually join the Communist Party, but there are certainly many people in the central headquarters of the Labour Party who are deeply, deeply antipathetic towards anything like socialism and towards social democratic politicians like Jeremy Corbyn. You have to look at the record of the last Labour government under Tony Blair. That's certainly, they've introduced a minimum wage, which is a good thing, and I'm very glad they did. However, a large part of their policies were not friendly to the working class. They allowed some privatization, the private finance initiative, which meant that public sector, something which cost a certain amount in the public sector, if it was done through PFI, private finance, cost about 40% more and benefited nobody but city bankers. So, yeah, Labour is Labour, but at the same time with some great reservations. Does that answer your question?
Is there any minimum wage system is implemented in Britain?
A minimum wage?
Minimum wage.
Yes, yes. Labour introduced one back in the latter part of the 20th century. It was opposed deeply by the Conservative Party at the time, and some people in the Labour movement weren't too sure about it either. But it's been very successful, and now the Conservative Party talk about it as if it were.
What is the minimum wage system right now? How much they will earn? Minimum wage.
I'm not sure what the exact figure is. I can go ahead and find out for you, but it's something like £7.50, £8 an hour, but it varies. It's different in London. We also have the idea of the living wage now, which is coming in. So it's not just minimum wage, it's a wage which expresses how much you actually need to be able to live a decent life.
It is all an hour basis or monthly basis?
Hourly basis, on an hourly basis.
Hourly basis, okay. Yeah. So it's all a contractual agreement.
Say again, please, sir?
It's all a contract agreement.
Yes, it's compulsory. People have to follow. If you don't pay minimum wage, then you will be in trouble. That's one of the big problems that people from ethnic minorities have. They're often taken in, and certainly people whose immigration status is questionable, they will work for employers who don't care about legislation and don't care about employing people on an official basis, and they will tend to be paid less. And some big names like Boohoo, the clothing people, they were the people responsible for a lot of the bad things that happened in Leicester lately. And they're the sort of people that will ignore the legislation.
Now I'm coming to the medical expenses. Those who are in retired from the public sector units or private sector units, how they will get the medical benefits? Is there government subsidized rate or they have to pay their own?
No, we still have a National Health Service which gives a large
how the process is going on to getting a medical expenses.
Medical expenses, and the NHS covers a hell of a lot of medical expenses. And if you're ill in this country and you have something which is life-threatening, the NHS is still fantastic. Anybody who comes here and has to use it talks about that. I mean, I've had some quite serious illness with members of the family over the last 5 to 10 years, and the NHS has been good. The problem can be whenever, like my son was very ill a few years ago, the NHS were fantastic. He went into the hospital and they saved his life. When you come out, then the care after that can be a little bit less good. And I hate to say it, but we were forced to go private to make sure that he got the drugs he needed. So the NHS still does a hell of a lot of good work. If you have something which threatens your life, the NHS is great.
It's a fantastic job. It is a fantastic job from the capitalist country. We are beyond our expectations.
Hell yes, it's still very good. It's under threat, under attack all the time. And I think because the NHS has become celebrated more over the last couple of months, then they'll take a little bit longer before they start to go ahead and attack it. But certainly if we're forced into a free trade agreement with the Americans,
right,
they will make really attempts then to go ahead and undercut the NHS's independence and also the public provision from the NHS.
Now I am going to the election process. As you told that your movement is going on around the Britain, but when the election has come, the people have choose between two parties, Tory and Labour. Why
Yeah.
not the third options are coming out? Why?
I think you have to look at the Labour Party as a massive coalition. Like I said, when I was in there, I remember thinking half these people should not be in the Labour Party. They should be in the Conservative Party. Some of them would be happier in the Liberal Party, and some would be happier in the Communist Party, as indeed the choice I made. But it's very, very difficult to break the two-party duopoly unless you have a strong regional presence. When you look now at Scotland, the Scottish National Party dominates there. They got to a certain critical mass of electoral support, and given the way our election system works with the first past the post, then they managed to break through. This happened with Labour as well in the 1920s. The Labour Party in Britain got a certain level of support, and the first past the post electoral system helped them. The Conservative Party currently have, I think, something like 60-65% of seats in the House of Commons, but they only got something like 45-46% of the votes. So the electoral system works against third parties on the way up, which is one of the reasons why the Communist Party, along with other parties, believe.
Communist Party is contesting the elections.
Uh, no, we used to, but at the moment there are no plans to put anybody up. I think a lot of Communist Party people worked for the Labour Party last time, because certainly I was able to support Labour under Corbyn. I'm not quite so ready to support Labour under Keir Starmer. So there might be some more Communist Party candidates next time, but it is very difficult to break through given the way the electoral system works, unless you have that strong regional element, which is what the Scottish National Party exploited in Scotland.
Even in trade union movement, there's many trade unions are very much active in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
Were there missions to support any political party, or they are independently fight for the working class right?
Oh, it's interesting. The Labour Party used to be called the Labour Representation Committee, okay, because they were put in there by the trade unions to represent the Labour movement. So here, unlike in other countries, the trade union movement came first, and Labour as a political force was a derivative from that trade union movement. And that element is still there. The Labour Party obviously isn't independent, but the vast majority of its funding comes from the trade union movement. And the big unions do support the Labour Party. The relationship is sometimes fractious. They don't always agree. But yeah, Labour, the unions, the mass of the unions follow the Labour Party and support them financially.
Once upon a time, Margaret Thatcher. Once upon a time, we see Tony Blair. But both peoples, both the rulers, are for the warmongering forces. They are like as a warmongering forces.
Yeah.
But in Britain, the anti-war demonstration is very much intensified. But why that force not to convert it with a political force? What is the reason behind it?
So I'm not really sure I understand your question. There's an anti-war movement here, but you're asking why they're so unsuccessful in stopping war.
No, I'm just talking about the Tony Blair from the Tory. I think so. It is the Labour. Is the Labour Party.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Margaret Thatcher. So these peoples are very much warmongering sections. They are built to establish the imperialist sentiment or tendencies around the world. But in that time, anti-war movement has been intensified in Britain.
Yes.
Why that movement couldn't bring the political changes? What is the reason behind it?
There is a large element of people in the UK, and I was chatting to some friends last night. We had a depressed reaction to an opinion poll which showed the Tory party, despite its disastrous performance over COVID, still way ahead in the opinion polls with about 47% of the vote. And you have a racist like Boris Johnson in charge as well. There is a large element of opinion in the United Kingdom which looks back on the empire with pride. They look back on World War II as a British victory rather than as essentially a victory for the Soviet Union against the Nazis. And the British have a rather toxic view of the history, which I think sometimes manifests itself in basically a fetishization of the military. And so even most people recognize now the Iraq war was terrible and the Afghanistan war was a real mistake as well. Uh,
Yeah.
we're told to go ahead and still admire the soldiers, help the heroes, etc. So there are an awful lot of forces here exploiting Britain's sense of its history, its glorious past, etc., which makes people a little bit suspicious of the anti-war movement. So anti-war people are seen as people that hate Britain, and they're as depicted as stuff. So it's just good old-fashioned exploitation of jingoistic patriotism, which diminishes the political force of
It
the
is now all over the world. Jingoistic patriotism is all over the world. But I think the peoples are very much sensitivity in their mind, and they are protesting against such warmongering peoples. But it is very unfortunate that is not bring as a political changes. That is very unfortunate. So, what is your view to attract the youth in the into the Communist Party? Is there any activities or any event you are organizing
Oh, there's
around?
a very good prominent Young Communist League, which is grown in popularity a hell of a lot lately. And the YCL, Young Communist League, those guys get out there on social media, they produce papers, they go out there and demonstrate, and they've been very successful lately. One of the problems is the name communist does stir a certain level of fear in people. They think we all want to round people up, shoot them, and kill farmers, etc., etc. And the people that are against this, and it's the left, it's a certain part of the liberal left that oppose us as much as right-wing people. They exploit some of the more unpleasant aspects of the Soviet Union's history against that as well. So with us, to a large extent, it's a reputational issue. There's something about the name communist that puts people off. However, over the last couple of months in particular, recruitment has risen considerably, particularly amongst young people, because there is a feeling that we really do need to change. And I think the environmental movement is a factor behind this as well. A lot of people see quite rightly what's happened to the environment as the inevitable derivative of the way rapacious capitalism works. And they're looking for a more fundamental change rather than just a few wee bits of tinkering.
First of all, we have learned that educate and agitate. That is the main motto for the IWW, Industrial Workers Union. Is a very much oldest trade union in the Britain. I think so.
Yeah, my,
IWW.
my hero, James Connolly, the Irish guy, he was a big man for the industrial workers of the world, actually. Yes, it's interesting.
And now I'm going to the historical perspective. In Scotland, there is a political movement and working class movement very strong on that time. But after the IRA, Indian, and what I'm saying, IRA, Irish Revolutionary Army or any other
Irish
name.
That was the Irish Republican Army, the IRA.
Yeah, but when they are arrived in the political arena, the left movement has been weak. Is that true?
The left movement has been weak since the arrival of the Irish Republican Army. No, not really. No. I mean, the IRA, there's the provisional IRA, which arose in the 1960s as a response to basically the British occupying the country and the failures of the official IRA. And so during the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, the IRA fought the British. Now, my family's Irish, and so there are different views within Irish people amongst what good the IRA did and what bad the IRA did. But they certainly did have that role of resisting. But it never really had much of an impact on British politics in the 70s and 80s. In fact, some of the anti-IRA and anti-terrorist legislation passed by the
Right.
Labour government was pretty
But
damn.
some people tagging them as a left organizations. IRA is a left organization.
Oh yeah, well yeah, the old official IRA, all right, the one that basically the official IRA, they became the Irish National Liberation Army, and that was certainly a specifically left-wing movement.
It's all about identity politics, nothing else.
Um, to a certain extent, but it was identity politics of people who were fighting a force they regarded as occupiers in their own country. And the Provisional IRA, when they begun in 1970, were a straightforward Catholic nationalist movement. But the Provisional IRA became quite a left-wing organization too. But very few British people would be aware of the IRA's politics and their attitude towards socialism. They just saw the IRA as a terrorist movement. But it didn't really make any impact on British politics. In fact, until Jeremy Corbyn came on the scene, because Corbyn Corbyn had a history of supporting Irish republicanism, and he spoke to Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness whenever they were still members of the Adams claims he was never in the IRA, but whenever Adams and McGuinness were prominent members of the Republican movement, Corbyn spoke to them, and so they continually abused Corbyn as being a supporter of the IRA. And even now, you will get right-wing people shouting at Labour people that they're IRA supporters. But that was only in the last few years when they tried to stain Jeremy Corbyn with the insult of IRA supporter.
What is the basic difference between the Scotland, Ireland, and UK? Any cultural differences are there, or what is the difference between the peoples, between the country?
Okay, we'll talk about. My family is both Scottish and Northern Irish, so I can guess that I've lived in London for 40 years, so I can guess and talk about all three. In between Scotland and England, the big difference now is political. Scotland votes for the slightly left-leaning Scottish National Party, and it votes for the Labour Party still. Scotland is a much more instinctively left-wing and collectivist country than England. And even though I myself opposed Scottish nationalism a few years ago, I'm beginning to become more sympathetic to it, because Scotland always ends up with a Conservative government because the politics in England are so much more conservative. I think the Conservatives got something like 44% of the vote in the UK as a whole, but they got about 48% of the vote in England.
Okay.
Scotland is quite left-leaning and quite moderately nationalist, but it ends up with a Conservative government.
But fact shows that education flourished in Scotland, and industrial output has been flourished in Britain. Is that true? Education's half in Scotland.
People talk a lot about the Scottish education system. It does have some very good schools and does produce some good educated people. It also produces quite a large number of people that have a very low educational attainment and struggle in life as well. So yeah, Scottish education can be good, but it does leave some people behind as well. I think that goes for English education too. But Scotland is more left-wing than England, so that's the big difference there. In the north of Ireland, you don't have class politics as we understand them elsewhere, because the national question still dominates. If you're a Catholic, you'll vote for Catholic parties. If you're a Protestant, you'll vote for Protestant parties. And unfortunately, that's how the overwhelmingly most people in Northern Ireland vote according to their sectarian affiliation.
One thing I'm in running out of time. Just last question I have to raise, that during the Iraq war, during the Middle East crisis, many peoples are from Middle East to settle up in Britain. So it creates havoc tension between the Britain peoples and immigrants people. So some right-wing forces gaining the ground in politics to gaining the nationalism issues. What is the situation in Britain right now? Because many peoples are very much anger, especially Britain peoples are very much anger on the immigrant peoples. Is that true?
Certainly, since the Brexit vote, things have got a little bit worse. I think the Brexit vote, no matter what you think about the European Union, did bring out some divisions, and quite a few people surprised me with their attitudes towards not just people from the Middle East or India or the Caribbean, but towards people from Poland, etc. So I think it's probably fair to say that Brexit was largely an outpouring of English nationalism. We had so many people come to the country in the early part of this century as a result of borders being opened up with the European Union, and that more than people coming here from the Middle East seemed to ignite a certain sense of racism and xenophobia many of us thought had disappeared. Now, because the country prides itself on having defeated the Nazis, really unpleasant, nasty right-wing parties tend not to do so well. Early part of the century, we had the British National Party, straightforward, ill-educated, thug-like Nazis. They got a couple of council seats. People felt a bit ashamed about that. They lost the council seats and they faded away. UKIP was basically, the United Kingdom Independence Party, was basically a right-wing party, the British National Party, in suits with a more posh middle-class voice. and the British are much more inclined to listen to a posh upper class voice than they are to working class people. So UKIP became quite successful, got about 17 or 18% of the vote. They got their referendum on the European Union, and we're now going to lead the European Union. So after that, after the vote, there was a bit of an increase in racist attacks, etc., and it's kind of going on now. We're still not a country particularly at ease with ourselves, and there are many people who genuinely do not like black people or brown people, and not too keen on people from Poland either. It's not quite so bad as some people suggest, and not quite so bad as it may look from the outside. Living in London, you get a different picture, because here we all live together. I'm married to an Indian girl. Loads of people I know have married across the racial divide too. Outside London, you get a more, shall we say, you get a less cosmopolitan view of life outside London. Right. Certainly in Scotland, there's a greater tolerance of racial difference in Scotland as well, which is one of the reasons why Scotland voted overwhelmingly to stay in the European Union too. Yeah, so it's a varied picture. One of the things that depressed me most over the last couple of days was talking to a few people who try and make out there's no problem. There is a problem, and the problem is still significant. Like, if you apply for a job with an Indian name, you have to send 60% more applications to get a reply to your job application. And we talked about earlier, the pay gap between the various ethnic groups is still pretty strong. So yeah, we do have issues, but we're not fighting each other on the streets all the time yet. But given the recession coming post-COVID, you never know what might happen there.
Really, we got the real picture from the Britain from you. Really, thanks to you to getting a 40 minutes from your side. Right. Any last message you have for the Indian peoples in Britain to join your organizations, or any other thought you have?
Just I wish the Indian people very, very good in their fight against COVID, and let's all get together and fight the rise of Hindu nationalism, and realize that we have one enemy, which is the capitalist class. It's not each other. All right, and whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim or whatever, we get together and fight the wealthy, because they try to divide us so they can go ahead and keep ruling us.
Thank you very much. Take care. Stay safe. And we all believe the COVID-19 has been defeated by the united force of the people.
Let's hope
we all believe it. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Take care.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, my friend. Cheers now.
Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye-bye. Thank you.